I think violent extremism has always been a challenge, but we've just recently paid more attention to it. One of the reasons is political. Certainly in the last US administration, President Obama and his colleagues took this issue very seriously, and they put a great emphasis on trying to prevent violent extremism, so there's been a new political momentum around this issue. I think in Europe in particular, it's been the intersection between violent extremism and migration. As you know, in Europe in the last 2 years we've had historic highs of migration and asylum seekers and refugees, and there's been some concerns about the links between those people and the potential for violent extremism. So for a variety of reasons we're paying new attention to, I think, what's been an historical trend. Globally first, I think one of the big challenges is the lack of definition. We can't really decide and define what violent extremism is, what causes people to become violent extremists, and more importantly, what the solutions are. There's still a lack of research and evidence and data about what the issues are and what the challenges are and how to answer those. At the local level, I think the challenge really is to measure results. We know that there's great activities taking place, for example, in Finland at the moment, but to demonstrate the results of those activities, I think, is a very challenging thing to do. It's a long-term issue. It's about behavioural change. It's about demonstrating the counterfactual. So really demonstrating that what you are doing is making a difference is a very difficult thing for us to do at the moment. One of the things we've learned at the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, GCERF, where I work, is that it's very hard to generalise. It's very locally specific and contextual. What drives one person to violent extremism in one place may be completely different at a different time of the year or next year, and it may be completely different to another valley or another region or another part of the world. On the whole, I would say it's about disenfranchisement and marginalisation. When people, especially young people, don't feel that they have a future, when they have no hope, when there's no prospect, then they can be tempted by violent extremist agendas or by violent extremist groups. And so one thing that GCERF is doing is trying to provide alternatives. Give people an education, give people training, give people a job, give people an opportunity, and usually they'll take that decision rather than the wrong decision. Well, I think one tip is to listen to local people. And what we're trying to do at GCERF, and I know what's taking place in Finland, is to really listen to local communities, because it's local communities that are suffering and they know the solutions. We have great researchers and academics and think tanks, but the answers really lie at the local level. Speak to mothers, speak to sports coaches, speak to religious leaders. They're traditional leaders. They're the people who understand what's going on and who have some idea about the solutions. I think a second tip is about funding. What we've learned at GCERF is there's great ideas and great solutions at the local level, but no money. And so I think we need to find a way to fill the funding gap and support local initiatives with finances. The third issue, of course, is sustainability. There's no point giving people a small amount of money, launching a solution, and then walking away. So we need to find a way to make sure this is a sustainable approach and a long-term approach, because I think a long-term approach is what's required. You know, I think there's been a lot of discussion about what drives radicalisation and what the obstacles are. There's too much emphasis on religion, in my opinion. We've done lots of research that shows that, in fact, religion isn't the main driver of people becoming violent extremists. It's about joblessness, or a lack of education, or a lack of a father figure, or a community cohesion that's broken down. So I think we overemphasise religion, which is a mistake. I think we haven't paid enough attention to the role of women. And women as agents across the board. Women can be perpetrators of violent extremism, women can join violent extremist groups, but also women as educators, as mothers, as community leaders can certainly find solutions as well. So I think too much attention on religion, too little attention on women at the moment. I mean, the main point to make is that there can be a link. I think to ignore the possibility of a link between migration and violent extremism is a mistake, but I think we've overplayed it and overemphasised it. I think migration is many things. It can be a risk, but often it's a challenge, and often it's an opportunity, and it brings integration, it brings success, it brings economic growth. So violent extremism is one part of a bigger story. But if you ask me to look at the linkages between migration and violent extremism, I guess there are a few that I have in mind. The main one is that migrants and refugees especially are fleeing violent extremism. They're not coming to perpetrate violent extremism, they're leaving their countries because they're scared of violent extremism. I think a second intersection is that there is a concern that as more people spend longer and longer periods of time in refugee camps, in places like Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon and Pakistan and so on and so forth, there may be the risk of radicalisation among some people in those camps because they're hopeless because they feel there's no future, because they're stuck in a camp. I think we need to think much more creatively about finding solutions for those people. There is a risk that some asylum flows may be infiltrated by terrorist groups. I think we should accept that's a possibility, but there's very little evidence that it's taking place yet, so let's not make any decisions until we've seen the evidence. And certainly, even if 1 or 2 terrorists are arriving in places like Europe and the USA, that's not a reason to close our borders. These are 1 or 2 people amongst millions of people who need our concern, our help. A fourth challenge would be integration. I think in the European context, for example, we have large numbers of people arriving in Germany, Sweden, to an extent Finland as well. I don't think they will be going home, so I think they will be here for the long term. We have to make sure that they integrate successfully. We have to give them access to education and housing and employment, and make sure that they can build the future of our societies and not become marginalised from our societies. I mean, a couple of more things that strike me. One is that sometimes the arrival of migrants and refugees and asylum seekers generates extreme responses. So it's not the asylum seekers and the refugees who are extremist, it's our responses to them that may be extreme. There was a news article yesterday from Germany saying that last year in Germany there were 10 attacks on migrants each and every day. That's violent extremism against migrants, not perpetrated by migrants. So again, I think we need to be aware of how we're responding. I think we need more political leadership around these issues. The final one that I would really like to promote is that as well as being a cause and a consequence of violent extremism, migration can be a solution. Migrants, as you know, send home a huge amount of money each year to their home countries. That can begin to address the root causes of violent extremism. It can educate girls, it can lift people out of poverty, it can make people feel that they've got a future. That's what we need to do to solve this problem in the first place. And I also believe very strongly that migration is about multiculturalism. It's about global cities. It's about tolerance. And the more that we have migration and the more that you and I can learn to live with migrants, the more that I think we can undermine and challenge the discourse that's coming from some of our opponents like ISIS and Boko Haram and so on and so forth. So migration can be a solution as well as a cause and consequence of violent extremism. Our research at the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, GCEF, demonstrates that local actors have really good ideas. They know what the problems are and they probably know what the solutions are, but they haven't got the money to launch those solutions. Now, we're funding projects in a range of countries around the world. Some of those projects are around raising awareness. So giving mothers and sports coaches and clerics the tools to understand when something's going wrong, when your son behaves in a certain way, when people are not going to school, when there's high rates of unemployment, when people in your service are beginning to say strange things, then you can begin to spot the warning signs. So giving people the tools to spot problems before they become too serious is one thing you can do. Another thing is to give people the tools to mobilise for action. And a great example we have is bringing women together in a safe space to share their concerns. You know, I was concerned about my son or my daughter. I didn't realise that you had the same problem. I didn't know that she had the same problem. Here's a chance for us to share experiences and talk to each other. It's such a relief that I'm not alone and going through this alone. That sort of space, I think, is really important. The most important one is about creating alternatives. Let local communities flourish. Get the private sector involved. Create jobs. Provide training. Give small loans and small grants so that people have something to do. Because when people have something to do, they'll do something constructive. They won't do something destructive. Internationally, the key is to maintain our focus on preventing violent extremism. It's been a very strong agenda over the last 2 or 3 years. I think there's been a lot of resources put into it. I think there's been some initial successes, but I still think the agenda is fragile. And I think it would be a great shame if the international community retreated away from this and started focusing completely on counterterrorism. Counterterrorism works, it's important, but we must have the preventive end of the spectrum as well. And there are certain concerns in certain parts of the world that we may be retreating from prevention. And I think that would be a great mistake. So I think it really is important for all of us to demonstrate the success, to demonstrate the value, to demonstrate the business case, to really show that prevention is an important thing. We must maintain the course.